we will ask Executive Head, Dr. Palesa Skejane, to give us a welcome. And then from there, we'll continue with the introducing our speaker, and then we go to the lecture. Dr. Skejane, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Managa. Good afternoon, colleagues, or good morning or good evening, depending on where you are in this beautiful world, troubled with some conflict in some instances. And I believe Dr. or Professor Aremu would be touching on some of these challenges that we face regarding the conflicts in the continent, but also the governance-related matters. In a way of welcoming you, colleagues, I know you're probably also getting tired of me welcoming you at every series that we undertake, so please bear with me. It's really an act of ensuring that you understand that working with us, we have given you a platform which you should call it home. So we will always welcome you in this home of ours that we are collectively building as a team of HSRC, but also with you being part of our team in the rest of the continent, wherever you may be. Colleagues, as we enter the second series of the masterclasses, again, I will always reiterate that I'm quite grateful that you remain committed and dedicated to these platforms or these masterclasses for us to share and have a sense of where the continent is headed or where it's not headed, because it could be that way as well. But also, I think I want to appreciate the opportunity in which it provides to us. It tells us that we are able to bring different minds into one room for us to use multiple lenses to analyze the prospects, challenges that we as a continent have to participate in. So, as we say, development through knowledge for us as AYGS, it is through these knowledge opportunities that we discuss, we disseminate, we co-create with you, and for you to give us time to also want to ensure that you can contribute. Our hope is really that we just do not end at debating or us disseminating, but it is for us to co-create and develop forums that will take these ideas forward. And let me thank Professor Fatai Aremu, as he is going to deliver this afternoon's talk, that I know his work, he has written prolifically around issues of governance. He will also be joining the African Institute of South Africa as a visiting research fellow because of his distinguished profile on research. But also, I think I want to, I want you, colleagues who are participating today, to ensure that you can take him to task as far as understanding the capacity that would be required to implement these ideas. So again, as I say, I just don't want us to be deliberating and laboring on the ideas, but how do we find a space to implement these ideas, be it through the writing outputs that we develop, the forums, as I've mentioned earlier on, but also I think where we can actively contribute towards policy making. So, Prof, I hope that in your deliberation this afternoon, you are able to guide us on that aspect as well. The team that continues to implement the program, thank you very much. I really don't take it for granted that you remain to the professionalism, the ethic in which you also execute these programs. It's highly appreciated. So I want to thank the team and those who really just come in to join us. Thank you very much. In closing my welcome remarks, let me just convey another gratitude from the rest of the organization, including the CEO and the Deputy CEO who are behind this program. So colleagues, please do enjoy this program as it is yours. do not feel that you are unable to reach out for further suggestions, recommendations, you are welcome to do that. So thank you very much. Let me hand over back to the program director.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sekejane, for the warm welcome and the introductory remarks. So now we are going to go to the item of introducing our keynote speaker by Pamela. Pamela, over to you. You can introduce our keynote speaker, and then he will be able to take us through the lecture.
Thank you very much, Program Director. A very great afternoon to all the colleagues present and the scholars present here today. My name is Pamela Mashamaite, and I'm a PhD research trainee with the Africa Institute of South Africa. Today, I have been given the honor to introduce our keynote speaker, who will be speaking to the theme of governance, peace, and security in the implementation of the Africa Free Continental Trade Area. Our keynote speaker today is Professor Fatai Aremu, who is a professor of political science at the University of Ireland, Nigeria. He obtained a BSc in political science from the University of Jos, an MSc of political science from Usmano Danfodio University in Sokoto, and a PhD in Asia Pacific Studies at the Ritsumeikan Asia Pacific University in Japan, where he was awarded a Certificate of Excellence for Outstanding Quality Research. Professor Fatai Aremu was a senior technical advisor on policy and legislative advocacy at a Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation-funded advocacy and social accountability project. This project, Partnership for Advocacy in Child and Family Health, was anchored by the Development Research and Project Center in Abuja, Nigeria. In that position, he coordinated and conducted several studies, training programs, and top-notch policy engagements on health sector budgets, health policies, and legislation. Before joining DRPC, he was the head of the social political unit at the National Institute for Legislative and Democratic Studies, National Assembly in Abuja, where he conducted policy research and training activities on policy engaged research, bill analysis, and budget tracking for legislature, legislative aides, and parliamentary staff. As part of the ongoing reform and modernization of the federal civil service in Nigeria, Professor Aremu designed, organized, and facilitated retreat programs for the Federal Ministries of Information and Culture, as well as the Federal Ministry of Labor and Employment. He also played a significant role where he aided both ministries in sensitizing and educating federal civil servants on the implementation of the Federal Civil Service Strategy and Implementation Plan, which began from the year 2021, and it will continue up until the year of 2025. Over to you, Program Director.
Thank you very much, Pamela. And now it's over to you, Prof, to take us through the lecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, the Program Director. The Executive Director, Dr. Palesa Sekejane, my distinguished colleagues, let me say good afternoon from this part of the world. It is my pleasure to join all of you this afternoon for this important discussion as part of the series of lectures for the Masterclass of AYGS in HAISA HSRC. As introduced, I am Fatai Aremu, and I will be anchoring this presentation. Looking forward to a very fruitful and productive discussion with all our colleagues out there. I hope you can hear me. Dr. Rodney?
Yes, we can hear you, Prof.
Very good. with the kind permission of Executive Director and our distinguished colleagues, I would like to share the screen. Do I have your permission to do that? Or let me just, before I do that, let me show my face so that those who have not seen me before will be able to put at least an image behind the voice. Can you see me?
Yes, we can see you, Doctor. And you have rights to share your screen as well. Thank you.
Yes, so
Welcome.
thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So can we see the screen now? Is it already projecting?
Yes, we can see
Yes, it is.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So the title of this session is Governance, Peace, and Security in the Implementation of Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Without much ado, I will proceed to the background. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we are all familiar with our dear continent, and we know that the continent for a very long time have not received favorable media coverage, particularly in the West. It's still receiving unfavorable media coverage till today. But the landscape is changing, the ecosystem is changing, and new generations of Africans are not taking those pre-existing prejudices and false narratives about Africa. However, I will take this discussion as a family meeting where we tell one another the truth, but at the same time, we will be very optimistic and positive about what is working in Africa and be very bold about what we need to improve on. So as we all know, the quest for regional integration in Africa has been on the front burner for a very long time. And the launching of Africa Continental Free Trade Area in 2018 is a high watermark in the evolution of the various experiments at an integrated continent. And the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is a very bold and very ambitious step to leapfrog the continent into economic prosperity. The overarching goal of the project is to ensure greater synergy and connectivity of African economies to enable us to reap the benefits of economies of scale, so that by so doing, the continent will expand its value chain, boost growth, accelerate job creation, and fast-track poverty eradication. But the logic why Africa Continental Free Trade Area is unique is the fact that it is more inward looking. It's seeking to boost substantially intra-African trade. It wants a much more indigenous African-led prosperity, not the one that is imported from elsewhere. So the underlying logic is that those factors that predisposes the continent towards violent conflict, civil unrest, and insecurity, and the bad media coverage from the Western world will be addressed. There is a new drive. There is a new vigor in the need to amplify the prosperity of Africa, the goodness of Africa. And that's what Africa Continental Free Trade Area symbolizes. So it holds a huge prospect for growth, for job creation, for poverty eradication all across Africa. However, reaping the benefits of an economic union is hinged on the trinity of good governance, peace, and security. Without having effective governance, without having peace and stability, without having security, it is difficult to imagine how the benefits of Africa Continental Free Trade Area will materialize. But on the other hand, the successful implementation of the free trade area will bring employment creation, bring about economic empowerment of an average African, improve the livelihood. All these are prerequisites to enable peace and security to reign. So we can see a bidirectional linkage between governance, peace, and security and integration. So, and what are the issues on ground? Despite the size of Africa, despite the enormous endowment of the African continent, including human and natural resources, Africa's share of global trade remains 2.8%. And intra-African trade is just about 16% compared to more than 25% for ASEAN. So, and quite logically, the founding fathers of Africa had foresight. They tried to do a continent-wide integration that didn't really materialize immediately, but the seeds were sown back then. And the seeds were sown in each of the sub-regions with the regional economic communities. And these RECs have really grown over time. They have made progress. I'm talking about the SADC in Southern Africa, ECOWAS in West Africa, EAC in East Africa, and others across the region. So, and because these sub-regions have made efforts to continue gradually, it's like serving as a building block to what we can now call, I mean, the time is now ripe for a continent-wide consolidation of all these sub-regional efforts into the African Continental Free Trade area. So the utmost challenge before CFCA is how to consolidate the pre-existing progress already recorded in each of the sub-regions. And Africa Continental Free Trade Area is considered to be the vehicle to enable Africa leapfrog this economic integration agenda that have been in progress for several decades now. So just to refresh our memory about the free trade agreement, the aim is to facilitate free flow of goods and services across the continent and boost the trading position of Africa in the global market. So specifically, it aims to eliminate tariffs and non-tariff barriers to trade in goods progressively. Progressively is emphasized because they know you can't achieve everything at once. So you do it in phases. And then to liberalize trade in services progressively, cooperate on investment, intellectual property rights, and competition policy. Cooperate on all trade-related areas, and also cooperate on customs matters, and so on and so forth. Now, where does governance come in the whole conversation around the free trade agreement? As we can see from the foregoing, all the objectives of the free trade agreement has at its center governance. Without having effective governance, without having what we may call, in inverted commas, good governance, regardless of the meaning we attach to it, we are talking about functional institutions across the continent. It is difficult to imagine how you will be able to eliminate tariff and ensure compliance across countries, how you will enable the institutions to ensure liberalization of trade and services, how you will be able to set the rules and procedures for cooperation on investment, intellectual property rights, and competition policy. And without having all these institutional mechanisms in place, all the rules and procedures here clearly set out and operated with the principles of transparency and accountability and collective decision-making. It is difficult to imagine how all this will materialize when the governance ecosystem is unpredictable, when the governance ecosystem is not predictive, is not effective. So you can't really plan, and you can't. So what you see in the process is lack of trust among the key players, and each one trying to then outdo the other. Because where there is no trust, it is difficult to imagine effective cooperation. So it is with effective governance, good governance, transparency, and accountability in each of the member countries that all the ambitions, all the lofty objectives of Africa Continental Free Trade Area could be attained. And this is where governance is at the center of the conversation and should be at the center of the conversation around the implementation of Africa Continental Free Trade Area. What do we mean? Each African government is expected to adjust and modify their structures and processes as they exist, because this is it's a new ecosystem, it's a new era. So to do that, and to do that within the timelines, requires that the institutions are functioning at optimal capacity with transparency and accountability. It is by so doing that it can foster trust, confidence, and cooperation that can bring all the members to the table. And when they are speaking with open minds. They are not suspecting each other. So not only that, the African continent and the free trade agreement will provide an umbrella for all the African countries to act as one and speak with one voice. Our external actors, extra-African actors that always play on the division in Africa, to divide one group against the other, to pitch one country against the other. We respect Africa. And investors will know that, no, it's not business as usual. You can't do divide and rule anymore. So investors, development partners, they would treat Africa more seriously and with respect. So good governance is really key. And the question here is, how do we improve on what is already on ground by ways of institutions, procedures, and the rules in each member state and across member states? So, and this then connects to the second important pillar, which is peace and security. I believe the Western media has not been fair on Africa. There's no doubt about that, because every part of the world have their own share of their problems, including the United States, where shooting takes place in every time, and they are unable to ban guns, and you can buy guns as if you are buying a piece of candy on the shelf. So every region have their own. Latin America has their own problem. Asia has their own problem. So there is no big deal about the fact that Africa is so this idea of making Africa to look as a basket case in the world doesn't just, we don't buy that. Nevertheless, we know that across Africa, in East Africa, there are problems of Al-Shabaab and all that. And when we just move a little bit up north, we have Sudan, we have South Sudan, with their own basket of instability that they are dealing with. Then coming back to Central Africa, so coming back to DRC, then coming down to Niger, and then we have Mali, we have Burkina Faso, we have Gabon, we have Nigeria, we have Mozambique down the line, and a host of other countries where what we can say, problems of governance problems of transparency and accountability, particularly in the leadership selection process, in the electoral process, the trust of the people, inability of the elite to bring themselves together and form an elite consensus about the agenda for their respective countries is now crystallizing into some form of instability. And it is difficult to imagine how the free trade agreement will produce the desired objectives without having many of these countries put their acts together by instituting effective governance, good governance in their respective domains. Because we need all the countries to come together to act as one to enable the free trade agreement to succeed. So issue of governance is still connected with the questions of peace and security. And then it also circles back to questions of opportunity for growth that the free trade agreement offer, because the more growth that we are able to generate, the more prosperity we are able to generate. And if the governance system is managed in such a way that it is inclusive and fair to all, so that every individual have a bite of the cake that comes out of the free trade agreement, the chances are that people are likely to be happy. You will have hope for a better tomorrow. And once you have hope for a better tomorrow, you will not want to destroy it today. So the issues about peace, about security, still circles back to the questions around governance and still takes us back to the need to make the free trade agreement to work. So instability, violent conflict, and civil unrest, all these hinder trade, they disrupt value chains and halt the movement towards economic growth and prosperity. And this has been the challenge with effective integration and economic growth in Africa for quite some time. So what the challenge before us now as intellectuals and researchers is how do we break that vicious cycle so that we can then move on the path of progress sustainably. So addressing the challenge of insecurity in the continent, therefore, we create an enabling environment for the Africa Continental Free Trade Area to foster true intra-regional trade. And therefore, Africa still needs a coordinated security effort to ensure that safety of trade routes and movement of goods and services across the continent is guaranteed. So all these connect to each other. And then by so doing, the synergy that is required for the free trade agreement will be ensured. Already, the building blocks are there, and that's the advantage that the free trade agreement has. The governance ecosystem is not empty. The structures have been built over time, particularly in the sub-regions, and the African Union has also been reinvigorated, and the institutions of African Union have matured over time. So all we just need to do is to harness, consolidate these pre-existing institutional intergovernmental frameworks. First, on the one hand, to enhance peace and security, and on the other hand, to enable the free trade agreement to materialize and succeed. So another layer is the infrastructural deficit, which is also not helped by the lingering conflict and instability in some of these African countries. So deficit in the area of transportation, the area of energy, telecommunication. And this could be bridged quickly by leveraging the existing intergovernmental frameworks. So then this also takes us back to the need for effective and good governance, and then peace and security on the continent. So the question is, how do we fast track the process? How do we make sure that the free trade agreement proceeds and continue on course to take Africa to the promised land? There are some hurdles that need to be crossed, and as intellectuals and researchers and knowledge producers in this domain, our reflective laboratories can zoom in on some of these issues, because when we say you want to eliminate tariff and non-tariff barriers on trade, which is good and necessary and required for the free trade agreement to work. But these are countries that are used for many years, decades, to protecting their local industries. The unions are there. All the other stakeholders in the domestic economies are there that will always want to protest, and it is within their right to protest. So as researchers, how do we come in to generate useful policy recommendations to harmonize the various interests around the implementation of free trade agreement? There's also the question of revenue, because many African countries rely on the revenue generated from tariff and non-tariff barriers. So how do we generate reliable and credible evidence to convince member states to trust the process and to believe that, well, you may lose some revenue by eliminating tariff, but you are going to gain manifold in other areas. What other areas? This is the role of researchers. This is where we come in to really generate solid, reliable, and timely evidence to convince decision makers across African countries. Second major hurdle is the infrastructure deficit in the area of transportation, communication, and energy. There's huge deficit, but there are efforts that are already ongoing to bridge this gap. And the beauty of this, and another research agenda, is that whenever there is a problem, it also presents an opportunity, because when you invest in transportation to support the free trade agreement, when you support communication infrastructure and you support energy infrastructure in a country as huge as Africa and as young as Africa, there is so much benefit to make in the short, medium, and long term. It's a worthwhile investment, but we need scientific evidence to convince prospective investors, to convince players in the field that there is so much money to make when you invest in this. Third one is the customs and border procedures. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the customs that we have across African countries spend their entire career being trained and retrained on how to prevent free movement of goods and services, on how to close the borders. Now, we're trying to change the entire narrative. We're trying to change the entire ecosystem. And we want all the customs organizations in each of the member states to move lockstep, because if they don't move together, any loophole will bring down the entire architecture. So how do we ensure harmonization in institutions that have traditionally been known to work in silos, to go it alone, to defend their borders, to protect their borders? So this is a very huge research agenda that, as African researchers, we are best positioned to do this. I don't think there is anybody in Harvard or somewhere that can do this except us. And this also takes us to the issue of rule of origin. Rule of origin provides an opportunity for free riding. So once you have, for suppose you all know, we are familiar with collective action theories, and we know what free riding brings into collective action. How do we institute mechanisms to monitor and enforce the rule of origin effectively, so that extra-African players do not take advantage of the opportunities of the free trade agreement that is already on board? This is also a huge research agenda for us. Then the diverse economy is another area that we may need to have more deliberation on, is asymmetry. So distinguished ladies and gentlemen, asymmetry is a huge issue, but in scholarly communities, we've not paid due attention to it for some reasons that we may leave for another time. But for now, how does asymmetry present a serious hurdle to the implementation of the free trade agreement? In each of the sub-regions, there are countries that are bigger. I mean, South Africa in Southern Africa, probably Nigeria in West Africa, maybe Kenya in East Africa. You see one country that tends to be bigger than the others, maybe even combined. Now, when it comes to the implementation of free trade agreement, suspicion could come in when the smaller countries realizes that, oh, the big country wants to take advantage of this large market and it's going to favor them. They have bigger industries. They have the potential to reap the benefits. What is going to be in it for us? They are back again to dominate us and all that. So this fear and suspicion, which has been the bane of previous efforts at integration in the past, are still there. What kind of research design can we apply to mitigate the consequences of asymmetry so that it doesn't derail these very lofty projects that the free trade agreement represents? So this is a very big research area which we have not looked at. The bottom line is that it's a very soft and invisible issue. When you call a conference of the countries to come and consider and sign treaties, it's at the back, particularly of the minds of the smaller countries. So, and in most cases, the big countries are not even aware of what's going on. And the small countries will not come out openly to say, these are our affairs. So this fear, suspicion, lack of disparity of attention between the big and the small countries creates rooms for disagreement, and you see the small countries trying to pull back a little bit. All that will just require is for one extra African countries to just pull the trigger, and then you see everybody moving their own ways. And then that connects the final part, which is coordination and implementation in the 55 countries in Africa at once. This requires a lot of solid research evidence to provide the roadmap. More policymakers, decision makers, they are not researchers. And sometimes they don't even care about research anyway. So our own job is to make sure that we not only generate solid, reliable, credible, and timely evidence, we package this evidence in such a way that it is attractive for the decision makers to use in order to make these projects to succeed. So what are the prospects? To be honest with you, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I think this is a huge prospect for Africa. This is the opportunity for Africa to take over the entire world. The potential is limitless. And we can actually become the beacon of hope, not just for our region, but for the entire world, as it has been in the past, in history. So, and the good thing is that we have a generational shift across the continent, which researchers, we have responsibility to capture and document. What do I mean? There is a new generation of African that is not interested in, I am Zulu, you are Xhosa, you have this, I'm Yoruba, is Igbo, is Kikuyu, I am this and that. What they want is money and enjoyment. They just want to live a good life. They don't care whether you are Kikuyu or you are this, Luo, or you are, no. What they want is they want to make money. They want to do business and enjoy their life. So how do we harness these new forms of identity that are coming up that revolves around a good life, that transcends the artificial boundaries that we have erected along ethnic, religious lines in Africa that has held the continent back, and within a very within a twinkle of an eye, people will start burning houses and start killing themselves. So it is our responsibility as researchers to latch on this kind of opportunity, particularly among younger generation. How do we bring younger voices that have been ignored for a long time and will be expressed anyway? But if you don't capture them and let it express naturally, they will express it in ways that are not really very good and that may be detrimental to the system. So it's also a challenge for us as African researchers. So in short, there is a very close and intricate relationship between governance, peace, security, and the crucial roles they play in the realization of the dream of Africa Continental Free Trade Area. So successful implementation of Africa Continental Free Trade Area will in turn steer Africa away from civil unrest, instability, and poverty. This is no longer the Africa of the future. It is here and it is now. What are my recommendations before I wrap up? One, we need to invest in accurate, multi-layered, reliable, credible, relevant, and timely research evidence to support policy decisions. This is very important. This is a new ecosystem. It's an uncharted waters. Decision makers are not sure of where to go, what is it to do, and they must do something anyway. The responsibility of the researcher is to serve as the light for them. Second, there is need for synergy among knowledge producers across the continent. In the era of, if we want a truly integrated Africa, I want the African Continental Free Trade Areas to succeed. There is no better community of Africans that can provide the roadmap for a successful implementation of the free trade agreement than the African researchers. African researchers cannot perform this role if they operate in silos. Unfortunately, the knowledge production ecosystem in Africa is fragmented, and is also a victim of these border boundary and nationalism. So it's time to bring down these walls and operate as truly African researchers, not South African researcher, Nigerian researcher, Ghanaian researcher. No, that era is gone, and we are playing catch up. And I'm happy to be part of the African Institute of South Africa. I think it's the only institute, to the best of my knowledge, that has a truly African mandate. I'm not aware of any. Maybe there are some, but they may not be as visible as we know them. So to play this leadership role in this new conversation is a very solemn responsibility on AISA and the team, and some of us who are also prepared to support in this evolution. So again, the next one is a stronger interface between policy evidence producers and end users. This has been there for a very long time. End users are groping in the dark for ideas. Evidence producers are busy sweating in the library and writing a lot, and the bridge between them is virtually non-existent. So it's time to now bridge this divide. And to create a sustainable regional architecture to support the production, dissemination, and consumption of policy research evidence. And this connects to the leadership role that AISA can play to really foster this new conversation. And most importantly, the way the knowledge production ecosystem is structured in Africa is that in the universities, in the research institutes, people are doing research for its own sake. We are now talking about a research that is able to not only inform decision-making, but it's able to shape outcome in more productive and impactful ways. So it's a different composition completely. So there is need for continuous capacity building for both the supply side and the demand side of policy evidence, especially among younger generation of Africans. So this takes me to the conclusion of this presentation. And I'll conclude by saying that history is upon all of us. Our fathers, our grandfathers, they did their best in their own generation. What legacy are we going to leave behind for future generation of Africans? So the challenge is before all of us. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Prof, for such a great talk. Thanks, colleagues, for listening. So we can see that we have enough time that we are going to use to engage on the discussions. Like Dr. Skejana has indicated when she was opening, that when we manage to bring some of the high-profile scholar like Prof here, let's make use of them. Let's absorb as much knowledge as we can. And when one was listening, you could see that, thank you, Prof, for actually echoing to say, what is the space for our young graduates to see where they can advance their research income in terms of advancing this African continental free trade area, in terms of governance, peace and security. So I'm going to ask that if you have a question, you raise your hand, and then we can also use the chat to pose some comments and also pose some questions. But the floor it's really open, and we know that some of you here, you'll be participating in the AYGS next year. So this was the main idea that we organized this masterclass to prepare you for. So we know that the due date for submitting your papers are also approaching. So where you are finding it difficulties, this is a platform where you are able to engage with our esteemed speakers. So I will welcome the question or any comment that it can come, even though if some of you are expecting this area, and then you're welcome to add the comments to the lecture so that we have a robust discussion. Do we have a first question? I see the hand from our Wasim. Then you can go ahead. Alwal, you can go ahead. Please unmute and ask your question.
Okay, can I go ahead, sir?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, Prof, I'm glad to hear you again. Thank you so much. You have always been a great mentor to some of us from Nigeria. I'm glad you spoke extensively about the place of good governance in the success of AfCFTA. But sir, I want you to speak about the issue of electoral integrity. Because in many African countries, Nigeria inclusive, there are question marks on the way elections are conducted and the people emerging as leaders. And when the citizens do not trust the leaders, whatever they are leading the country to do will definitely not be supported. And AfCFTA is a very credible initiative, but then the success in view of what is happening about electoral integrity in Africa, please, sir, what can you say about it? And as young scholars, what can we do about it? That is my question, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for the question. Yeah, Prof, I think when you want to respond to that one, you can also take this one that came via the chat.
I've seen it.
Yes.
I've taken note of it.
Okay, thank you.
So let me take Oluwaseun's contribution before coming to Toby that posted the question on the chat. Electoral integrity, it's a major problem, because even not only Nigeria, when you look at many African countries that are really unstable right now, and they are struggling with the issue of governance, it goes straight to electoral integrity. Either you pick Gabon, you pick Niger, you pick any of these countries where some leaders have constituted themselves to lifetime presidents by manipulating the electoral process the way they want. And in most of these countries, if you look at it very well, but not only these countries, but many countries across Africa, you realize that voter turnout in each election cycle continue to decline. And the younger generation in most of these countries do not really have space for effective engagement and participation. So to be honest with you, because I take this platform to be a family discussion where we need to tell each other the truth. The electoral process have been taken advantage of by politicians, and they manipulate the process to further their own selfish, not the national or the African interest. And the casualty here will be trust and legitimacy of the outcome of the electoral process. But again, this brings us back to the question of democracy and the version of democracy that Africa appeared to have taken on without really indigenizing it to suit our own ecosystem. And there are lessons within Africa that African countries can learn. I've been privileged to visit South Africa a couple of times. I've led delegation to go and study the South African system. And I used to, not that the South African system is perfect by any means, but when you look at the institutional design and the constitutional backing given to the institutions, it's difficult for individuals to appropriate the institution, no matter how powerful that leader is. And they have what they call, is it Article 9 institutions or Chapter 9 institutions, which part of which is the election management body, the Electoral Commission. So the process of choosing the chairman and members of the commission is done in such a way that the president cannot really exercise control over them. It's different from countries like Nigeria or Gabon and other countries where the president can choose a card-carrying member of a political party to go and head an electoral body. And once you have that system, you can predict what the outcome will be. So, related to that is the role of money in the electoral process, which brings us back to the version of democracy, the liberal democracy that we all imbibe. So when you look at the way this particular democracy is also practiced in the United States, if not that there are checks and balances and the institutions are a little bit stronger, money is a problem when it is injected into democratic process, because what it means is that elections becomes exceedingly monetized, and the electoral process goes to the highest bidder. And when you complete the election, just win first. Then you can buy the tribunal, you can buy the judicial system, and they can validate your election. So if we want to build trust between the government and the people, between the elected and the electorates, as African researchers, we need to put on our reflective caps to see what kind of modifications do we need to the rules, to the processes, and the procedures. I just completed my tenure in an institute that reports directly to the president. And when we visited South Africa in 2021, I led the delegation. We made that recommendation very clear. There are certain institutions that need to be taken away from the direct control of the president. and the Electoral Commission, the election management body, is certainly one of them. For it to be fair, to be credible, and to be seen to be credible by all the parties. Unless we have trust in the process by which the leaders emerge, it is difficult to imagine how you can build trust between the government and the people. So I do not claim to have a silver bullet to solve this, and I think we still need further thinking. What kind of modification do we need to our governance process, our electoral process, our entire democratic architecture, so that they become truly representative of the will of the people? It is by so doing that we can foster trust, and the legitimacy of the government will certainly improve. In many of these countries, if military should take over, you still see citizens going out to jubilate. Not because they know where they are going, no, but because they just don't like where they are coming from. They are frustrated, particularly the younger generation. They are angry, they are upset, they are disinterested in the entire process. And the role of technology, they have access to information, unlike when some of us were growing up and there was no internet, there was no email, there was no Facebook. My daughter used to ask me, how did you live your life? Life must be really tough for you then, because how did you survive it? No Facebook, no internet, no email, but we survived it. So, but it's a different generation now with a different attitude. They are not patient. There is nothing like wait till tomorrow. They want a better life and they want it now. So the earlier the system adjusts and modifies and gives space for these voices to be reflected, to become fully inclusive and foster trust, we cannot predict what will happen tomorrow, and we don't know which country is next. But we, as researchers, our role is to capture these issues and put it out there, put it in such a way that they are easily consumable by those that will make the decision. So Toby Oniban also asked a related question, and he was particularly interested in whether there are case studies sorry, let me just he asked whether there are case studies that highlight the impact of good governance on trust in African nations, and how do issues like corruption and transparency affect trust between citizens. And I would say yes, there are several case studies that have been designed to investigate empirically the connection between good governance and trust. The studies have been designed in different ways. There are projects that were designed as experiments in different countries across Africa to test the connection between good governance and trust. There are studies like that in Kenya, there are studies like that in Nigeria, there are studies like that all over Africa. However, because these studies they are not really, unless you are aware, unless you know which project funded those kind of research, because those kind of research are not really the kind of research that are really publicized as such. But I am very much aware of many of these projects. I was part of a couple of them. If we have time, I can share insights on them. And then now that AISA is bringing us together, and they have been bringing us together, maybe we can, one of the things we can think about is this kind of profound question you've raised. How do we exhume some of these wonderful studies that are hiding somewhere and bring them to the public domain for people to see them? But there are several studies that highlight the connection, the nexus between good governance and trust in African countries. And they are very fascinating pieces of works. So, and someone also said, I want to, you see, where that's Hilda. I want to know some examples where good governance has impacted Africa. You see, if we want to approach this question, we have to lens or two approaches to follow them. Do we want to look at Africa as a whole, or want to carry our zoom lens to look at specific cases that have been used to study the impact of good governance of Africa? Just like the question that Toby asked, there are pockets of studies and projects and experiments that have been designed and implemented in different African countries, but they are much more community level, local level kind of intervention that then led to some kind of action research along the line, and their reports have been written, and they are fascinating pieces of report all over. Some of them are social accountability projects, some of them funded by some of these major donors. So there are some of them. And then Redeemer. We need to find a better approach to good governance, and some sectors of governance should be taken from that. That's very good, a comment. How can we as African states be able to embrace Pan-Africanism while at the same time promoting free African trade agreements? I'm also curious to know how this can be used to promote solidarity within African states, considering that we're having some sense of loss of solidarity within the African while trying. So, well, Esther, thank you very much for this question. Let me tell you, Esther, let me tell you the truth. An African is an African, no. And once the African blood flows in you, wherever you may be, you'll be an African. And we Africans, we are very proud of our identity. So Pan-Africanism is not an idea. It's not an ideology. It's our DNA. And we connect very well. So the free trade agreement is just to provide the vehicle to enable us institutionalize what is already in our DNA, in our bloodstream. So the solidarity of Africa is in our blood system. No African. There may be some few exceptions, but a typical African is a typical African. You need to see how people connect when they are you won't even ask of somebody's country. Once you see the person like this, your brother is your sister, and you continue to move along. It's when we can come back to Africa and this colonial mentality of dividing boundaries. See, when Berlin took place, some people went to do wedding in the other side of the border, and before they came back, they already took some things and blocked the road. They said they needed some papers. They didn't know. Many ethnic groups were divided along the borders, and the borders are not recognized by, I don't see any African country that really recognize those borders. Go to Niger and Nigeria, go to Chad and Nigeria, go to Uganda and Kenya, South Africa and all the neighboring countries. People move across the borders anyway, and we call them these so-called illegal borders. They are not illegal. It's just the white people that came to tell us that these are borders. Africans didn't. We operated as one family, and I think the free trade agreement is trying to now take advantage and leverage this goodwill that we have as Africans. So Pan-Africanism is in our bloodstream. I don't know whether we can still give the floor to some people to ask some questions while we come back to the chat room later on.
Oh, yes, Prof. So that is in order. So if there is anyone who want to ask question and comment, please take a floor, then we will able to go back. I see Edmo, you raise your hands, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Prof. I would be interested in hearing your thoughts or your comments about African solidarity around the issues of state sovereignty and the capacity of probably the African Union in intervening to enforce good governance. or electoral integrity in African states for the purpose of implementation of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Same.
Edmore, this is a very powerful question. Already there are mechanisms in place within the African Union, like the African Peer Review Mechanism and a number of other initiatives within the African Union to both encourage and to also provide some kind of sticks to ensure that African countries comply with certain basic minimum standards of governance. And there are so many other incentives that are attached to that. The Mo Ibrahim Index is one of them, and so many other initiatives like that that does some ranking to encourage African countries to adopt transparency and accountability, not only in the electoral process, but in the governance ecosystem generally. So African Union is really trying. And let me tell you, for those who are pessimistic about the value of African Union and the achievements of African Union, what I used to tell them is, let us do a counterfactual. Let's imagine a situation where African Union does not exist at all, or there was no transformation from OAU to African Union. There is no platform for African leaders and African citizens to really come together and deliberate on issues of common concern. Let's imagine a situation like that. How will Africa look like? So, the question of sovereignty is a universal phenomenon. And even the European Union, as advanced and as sophisticated and integrated project as it is still struggling with addressing the questions of sovereignty, because nations will continue to hold on to it. But the good thing, which I am very happy and optimistic about, is that the sub-regional, regional economic communities have really prospered over time. They have survived. In fact, they have surpassed the expectations of the founding fathers. They have instituted a number of protocols. They have brought on board a lot of governance monitoring mechanisms within those sub-regions, and they are trying to implement them. Maybe not at 100%. So this gives hope that mechanisms like the APRM and other Africa-wide initiatives that is driven by the African Union will continue to mature over time. The beauty of for those who are familiar with integration literature and integration theories, there is the doctrine of spillover, which, I mean, has been interpreted by many different scholars, but spillover comes in when cooperation in one sphere automatically triggers cooperation in other spheres. Without African Union, without APRM, without the regional economic communities like the SADC, like ECOWAS, like EAC, and so on, I think it is difficult to imagine how African Continental Free Trade Area will even be conceived in the first place. If that is the case, looking back 20 years ago, 30 years ago, if somebody had said that, okay, there will be a time where there will be an African-wide agreement and all African countries will sign up on it, they will take the person to the psychiatric hospital to say, no, please go and test this person. I think he's taking too much. But now we are here as researchers, as the torchbearers and light bearers of Africa, we can look forward into the next 2 decades, and we will be able to see stronger diffusion of electoral integrity and the willingness of African countries to part with some of their sovereignty in exchange for economic prosperity. Because a successful implementation of Africa Continental Free Trade Area will explode economic opportunities across the continent. There is so much money to be made by individuals, by companies, by organizations. Once the results begin to manifest, there is no need to compel. There will be willingness on the part of African government to part with some of their sovereignty in exchange for greater economic opportunities and improved livelihood for their citizens. And this is where we as researchers, we have to go to our laboratories and generate evidence to shape the narrative around a successful implementation of African Continental Free Trade Area, so that 10 years, 20 years down the line, when we look back, we'll begin to say, yes, this thing worked. So it's not something that we want to say we'll achieve tomorrow. It's a gradual process, but looking back at where we're coming from 20, 30 years ago, and then we can project that 20 years from now, it will be a totally different ball game, and a positive one for that matter. I think we have another hand up.
Yes, we can go to Mutinda.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Prof, for the presentation, quite edifying. I have 2 concerns. One is on the research. I'm looking at research in terms of the linkages with other institutions, maybe of research of higher learning. Maybe would you kindly give your proposal on that? And also I'm looking at gender when it comes to issues to do with good governance. In your recommendations, or rather, what would be your proposal in terms of having gender strengthen the place of women, maybe in trade, and also their economic empowerment through the objectives of this free trade area? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mutinda. Linkages with other knowledge production clusters or knowledge production institutions. So to be honest with you, Mutinda, this is a big problem. And this will go to the desk of Dr. Palesa, Haisa, HSRC, to look for funding and get big money, because this itself could be, how do we consolidate research institutions across Africa? There are efforts, there are some projects on ground, but to respond to the need of these grand initiatives like the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, we have to transcend this existing knowledge production ecosystem. They cannot address the volume, the quality, and the timeliness of the need for evidence that will inform decision making if we want this project to really, researchers to take the lead. And because we have all of them fragmented and scattered in the universities, in the research institutes, in different countries, the right hand does not know what the left hand is doing. And we have different, how should I say it? Different characteristics of different production clusters in the knowledge production ecosystem. You know, the Afrobarometer categories are doing their own thing. The ISAs are doing their own thing, and so many things are happening that they don't add up to give us the big picture. There is no time. A decision-making platform do not have the time to be considering what Afrobarometer is saying, compare it what ISA is saying, then compare it what the other one is saying, and say, okay, which one? So to enable this new integration project to flourish, knowledge must be ahead of it. But knowledge cannot be ahead of it if it is within its own domain fragmented. A proposal to donors in this area that is well packaged, I can guarantee that it will be well funded. But I don't know how that one can work. I don't know, but that's a food for thought for all of us. But there is need for more integration of long knowledge production, more linkages, if I may use that word. I don't want to use linkages because linkages, linkages is like a lower level order of this. We're talking about integration now of knowledge production itself that allows us to see a one-stop shop for knowledge about Africa on every area, on all sectors. Like a warehouse. Not this Codestria is doing that, Afrobarometer is doing another thing, that one is doing that one, this one is doing that one. No, that period is gone. So we are doing a lot of catch-up. You mentioned a very important point, which is about gender. So, and how women's economic empowerment comes into this integration of an increase in intra-African trade. This is a very big question, I must admit, Mutinda, because the way research is done right now, research is done with apologies to my men colleagues, with a lot of gender blindness. Most researchers cannot see very well. They need support. They need to have, this kind of glass that you need where you are not seeing very well so that they can see what is really going on. Most researchers, most researchers they don't have the ability to provide a gender perspective to the kind of knowledge they are producing. It's not just, so there is a lot of investment that is needed to first and foremost allow researchers to have a gender sensitive mindset to the production of knowledge, particularly for decision making, because when it comes to trade, when it comes to trade across African countries, when you travel across the borders, when you travel on the street, women are overwhelming majority of traders. But when you look at the numbers, you don't see them. When there are benefits, when there are initiatives to encourage intra-African trade, you don't see the women again, it's the men. And the policymakers will say, okay, we have advertised the initiatives in the media, we expected everybody to apply. How many women in rural communities read newspapers? Do they even have time to do that? So once you have advertised those kind of initiatives in the newspaper, or you have advertised them online, you have marginalized a significant proportion of women who are supposed to be beneficiaries of such initiatives. So not only do we need a more gender sensitive and gender responsive research approaches and a research mindset that is really truly gender responsive, we also need a total overhaul of the policy making and implementation ecosystem across Africa that is truly gender responsive, that doesn't treat women's economic empowerment as a favor to women. No, it is part and parcel of the package if Africa Continental Free Trade Area is to achieve the objective for which it was set. But the good thing about this again is that African countries also vary in their understanding of gender responsiveness and in their willingness to adopt gender responsive approaches, and there are lessons they can learn from each other. Some are really lagging very far behind. We need to bring them up. Those who are already a little bit ahead, we need to encourage them to move even a bit higher. Thank you very much for bringing this up, Mutinda. It's a very important question, and it is very important for those of us who are involved in knowledge production in the continent.
Thank you very much, Prof. And thanks, colleagues, for all those questions and the comments that came. I think this was indeed a very good discussion. And we also want to acknowledge and appreciate some of your kind comments on the work that we are doing. So it's better if it's you saying it, that you thank our efforts, and then I hope we will be able to do even better. So again, when I was looking at my watch here, you can see that we are getting closer to the close of our session. And just to give the closing remarks and concluding remarks and thanks us, we will ask Prof. Check Achu to give us closing remarks, and then we will be able to close the session. Prof, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Mananga. Thank you, Prof. Fatai, for that interesting presentation. I think our colleagues, from the HSRC, from across the continent, really listened to it, and the take-home message that came from that particular presentation. I really appreciate your input. I guess we will have more time to discuss on some of the key questions that have been asked at the AYGS, Dr. Mananga. If everything goes well, bringing Prof. Fatai to also interact with young colleagues on the continent. But again, I think it's also very critical. The African Continental Free Trade Agreement, it's a game changer if we actually, try to ensure that the implementation strategy is actually operationalized, in the sense that before the AfCFTA, we realized that basically Africa, the inter-trade between African countries was less than 5%, And I guess last year I was looking at the percentages to about 8% now, So the key question now is, who then do we trade with if we really want to take the continent forward? But again, I think the critical question as well, which Prof. Fatai was mentioning in his seminar remarks, is how then do we also ensure that we also address the issue of insecurity when we talk about free movement of trade, free movement of, not necessarily free movement, but trade amongst African countries. I think that's a key question that we as a continent need to take that on board. How do we ensure that in the process of facilitating inter-Africa or intra-Africa trade, we also address the issue of insecurity? Because for quite some time now, the issue of insecurity has been the main stumbling blocks to most of the aspirations that we put together to see the Africa that we really want in 2063. So I guess those are some of the key issues that I thought maybe as time goes on, we'll be able to interrogate with our colleagues, and to ensure that by the time we arrive in Nairobi in March next year, we would have probably come up with some kind of policy recommendation on the way forward. So basically, those are some of the issues that I perhaps want to put on the table, Dr. Mananga and Fatai and the colleagues, and that this is just a prelude to the discussions that we'll be having when the conference actually comes up. So thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Dr. Mananga. Thank you, Prof. Fatai, and hope to see you guys very soon. Thank you, colleagues. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, colleagues.
Yes.